Welcome back to the Built on Air podcast, season 12, episode 10. Good to be back with you. We've got a full house with us. We've got back with us Camille. You've been out for a couple weeks. Good to see you again, Camille.
I've been sick for forever.
Good to have you recovered from that. And Allie, welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yep. And we've got a new face with us, Bill French. Welcome.
Good to be here.
And we've had Bill on the show a few times, at least once.
Yeah.
I think so, yes. I think
this is the first time in this format. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Yep. Cool. So we did kind of a one-on-one interview. Who did that, Camille or Allie?
I was Allie.
All right. So if you want a full in-depth hour-long conversation with Bill, check that episode out from an earlier season. But we will learn more about Bill. We'll still dive into your history and background. We'll do a spotlight on that. So with that, I will walk through what we're going to be talking about today. Should be fun to learn more about Bill and what's going on with him. And so we always start off our show talking about round the bases, what's going on in the Airtable communities, keep you up to date on everything Airtable news related. Then we'll do a spotlight on our primary sponsor, On2Air. Then we'll learn more about Bill and his background as an expert in this Airtable community. And then we're just going to kind of open it up and have kind of a dialogue. Bill's got lots of topics he loves to talk about. So we're going to talk about a few things there, get kind of a state of the union on Airtable and the world of no code, low code, and computing in general. We'll see what we can learn from that. And time permitting, we might, we'll also highlight our community, how you can join. And then time permitting, we might do another segment. We'll see how it goes. So we'll kind of keep it open-ended. So with that, with round the bases, a few things going on in the Airtable world. Last week, we talked about, we're not going to dive too deep into this because we're going to bring on maybe a special guest later in the show. But I did want to highlight last Tuesday after our show, they did go live with changes to attachments. And so we started to see some issues pop up from the community. This is one. I know there was at least one other, probably a few more of people noticing it, even though it had been somewhat announced throughout the previous months. So changes to attachments now, they expire if you're using, it's really hard to clarify this. I'm going to wait we might have Kavan come on, who's done a lot of research on this. I know Kavan and Bill have talked about it, but anything precursor anybody wants to say before we do a deep dive into attachments?
Well, it isn't a topic that you can't really explain in either one sentence or even one paragraph, because it's so broad. It covers things that are going on inside of Airtable as well as outside of Airtable. But the bottom line is, I think Airtable just got tired of being the CDN for every image on the planet. And my rough estimates came up with 2.5 billion images. I mean, that's assuming 300,000 really active customers with, X number of records and images. So that CDN was big, and it still is big. And trying to get everybody off of that, it was almost like a crack cocaine thing, right? People got a little taste of, oh man, I could just host everything here, all my images, all my attachments. And then they said, oh, come on, we can't afford that, not for $25 a month.
Yeah.
So it's a mess.
Yeah. I've mentioned on the show before, I'm one of the 4 people who insist on having a static generated website and not use any sort of traditional CMS. So the problem originally with both of my websites was I had everything in Airtable effectively as my CMS, and then I would export everything as JSON and publish everything to my website. Well, that meant I was using the Airtable attachment links. And when I first heard of this change many months ago, I was like, well, okay, well, I'll have to adjust my setup. And without going too far into it, my revised methodology was to just use Google Drive and import that Google Drive folder into Airtable still. And now it gets those links get exported in my JSON, and I'm doing virtually the same thing, but not pointing at an Airtable attachment field anymore, which is good because you could get more storage cheaper in Google Drive than you can in Airtable. But there's pros and cons, and we'll dive into this later.
Yeah, so precursor, so a teaser, hang on to the show, and we're gonna talk more about this. Lots to talk about there. So, but definitely a change last week. And let's move on. So there was another announcement of a future breaking change. I bet Bill might be one of the few people this actually impacts.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my customers from long ago in the UK saw this and immediately phoned me up and said, "Are we impacted by this?" And I got to thinking about it, and no, we're not passing anything through URLs by and large. Our URLs are really tiny, but I can see how people would get stuck or get captured, swept up into this. We often like to use gets because they're convenient, right? URL parameters are convenient.
Mm-hmm.
And so we think, we're going to deal with the API right through the URL. And then before you know it, there's 75 fields going across the wire, and they're all in the URL. And that's just you being painted into a corner. The fact that they had to change this, I'm still wondering why. Why did they have to change this? Anybody know?
This is the first I'm hearing of it. I did not see this announcement at all.
Yeah, so this only impacts if you're using the REST API, and probably only impacts queries, the filtering. Mm-hmm. That's, I think, the only thing that could maybe be. So they're basically putting a cap at 16,000 character limits in the URL length.
That sounds reasonable to me.
Yeah.
16,000.
Right. Not only is it reasonable, but you probably shouldn't be doing it that way anyway.
Right. And I think I read this really briefly. The person is saying the vast majority of people don't even get anywhere close to 16,000, and I would hope, because how do you manage that?
Yeah.
Well, the fact that they called this a breaking change means that their analytics probably spotted people doing exactly this.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they would have just changed it and been quiet about it.
Yeah.
So that's my hunch. Let the other people down the road find this problem when and if it occurs. But yeah, the minute you start jamming queries into URLs, you're also opening up, I think, a security problem as well. Which I think I had a long debate with somebody about that, where they said, Airtable has really made a mess of this because they allow, filter by inside of queries. And the minute you do that, you can do injection and all sorts of stuff. And
I remember that thread.
What he was describing was something you could do with any software application on the web. Right? This is not an Airtable thing. This is just like a bad idea. Don't make it possible for people to inject stuff to get data back that they shouldn't see.
Yeah.
So, use post. Don't use get.
Yeah. So they've now implemented. So the workaround is they've implemented a post. This didn't exist before, so this is new. And so now you can do a post to do your query. And then if you've got a really long one, and if you're using the Node.js or the JavaScript library they've implemented in the latest version, it automatically uses post or detects if it's too long, then it switches to a post.
That's a smart change.
Yeah. So that is a change that probably doesn't impact many people.
Okay.
All right, moving on. So I've actually started to see this creep up, this issue. People are saying that you can no longer embed a form inside the extension. There's an extension to embed like iframes. And then there's a similar one. I'll kind of combine these. Within Notion, they're saying that you used to be able to use the embed code that for a view inside of Notion, and that stopped working at some point. So something's changed on Airtable. This one with Notion, it looks like something changed on Notion's side that made it not work within Notion. But it seems like Airtable's changing their embeddability, and people are starting to notice it.
Interesting.
Well, that sucks.
Yeah. I just went and checked a site that I have that has a lot of embedded views, and they all seem to be fine. But I mean, there's one I noticed a very long time ago when I'd try and use the embed block within Stacker. It didn't work if you just did like the share link, but if you actually add /embed into the URL, like it has in the actual like iframe code, then that did work. So I don't know if maybe that would be something to try and fix this.
Yeah. With the Notion, yeah, that's what they actually said with the Notion. They figured out if you just use, actually with Notion, it's the opposite. If you use the one without the embed,
right,
then it works. But the one with the embed apparently did not.
That's odd.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Yeah, I have a client who wanted to have some form built for them for input that needed to be embedded on their website, but also you could put the link to the form in the body of an email that they send. And we went with Airtable, and Bill, to your something that you mentioned quite frequently is, glue factories like Zapier and Integromat, now called Make, the artist formerly known as Integromat, where you're connecting two different apps together. The weak point is the connection in the middle. So we tried to keep the form in Airtable, and it works. But if you can no longer reliably embed Airtable forms, that's an issue. So I hope all of these similar sort of issues people are having are resolved by just including the /embed at the end and not some underlying issue. But I do see Kavan has said hi in the chat.
Yeah, I just pinged her.
Yeah, the artist formerly known as Integromat. That's a really good line.
I don't know if I came up with it. I think Scott, Scott Rose, friend of the show, has said it before because he's the expert.
What's ironic about that is that if you look closely at some of the Integromat systems that people have created, you'd swear that whoever created them was abusing opiates just like Prince was. So there's a connective tissue there somewhere. Just
there's something. I like what you can do in Make, but there's something about once you start adding in all the error handlers to make sure it's not going to throw everything into the fire if it encounters an issue. The visual editor aspect starts to, I think, become its downfall because you have it's not even a spider web. It's like a shotgun blast pointing to the right, and it just gets more and more difficult for at least for me.
I think it's a sawed-off shotgun blast.
Yes, you have to have an error handler on every single.
There's no choke.
Yeah, it's not.
The BBs are going everywhere.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, I definitely am biased, as most everybody knows. And if you're listening or you're the listener, I get really upset when people abuse things like Zapier and Make. So
yeah, very true.
That's another whole topic. We could do a whole show on that.
That's right. Okay, I'm going to do two quick kind of plugs off of Twitter, and then we've got Kavan here that's going to join us here in a second. So I was going through Twitter, and Andy Cloak, friend of the show, he's been on. He's the founder of Data Fetcher, and he made an announcement that he's starting to work on a second extension for charts and things inside of Airtable and reports. So that will be interesting. So if you like Data Fetcher and the work he's done there, and looks like he's looking for people to get insights for as he starts to plan that out. So that will be interesting to see what he comes up with there.
Hopefully he's implementing that using some kind of open source backend like chart.js or something.
Yeah.
I trust he is, but that would be very cool to pull that off, because wow, we are chart challenged as Airtable users.
It's one of the most commonly with Interface Designer, they're sort of pushing away from the need for some of the extensions that are present. And slowly but surely, they're adding functionality that eliminates some of the utility extensions.
Right.
But charting is not one of those, or reporting in general is the concept of reporting is not yet tackled well, I would say, in either of those two paths forward.
But, one of my first posts when I discovered Airtable was to tell the developers to stop doing charting. Right? I mean, that it's just silliness.
Yeah.
Every vendor tries this. They try to build every possible chart feature and facility into their platform. And it's nutty. It's completely nutty thinking. What they should do is make it possible for anyone to build any charting feature into the product. That they should spend all their money on ways to interface with all the charting horizons that are out there. Everything from, D3 to chart.js to, quickchart.io, all those things should be at our fingertips. And no one should, actually write a stitch of code at Airtable to do that. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Dan. I'm looking at this and, obviously I haven't played with it yet, but you can add your own colors to certain categories, which I have not seen a web app, whether it's Airtable or Glide or anything else that lets you do that. Get the specificity of this category should be yellow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and looks like chart.js, actually.
That's great. And even as good as he gets at this, there will be people going, yeah, but doesn't it do this? Or I can't do that. Before you know it, he's in the same, corner with a can of paint. And it's going to be hard to keep up with that. So it's that is a tough place to make money.
That's why I never touched charts. When I released Master Calendar, one of the first requests was, can you do something similar, but it pulls multiple tables into a single chart? Right. And I said no.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah.
All right, one more quick announcement, then we'll get Kavan on. So Airtable actually put out a tweet for those, obviously lots of companies going through layoffs right now. So they're keeping, it looks like this is managed by Airtable based off it. So they have a base going of companies that maybe are hiring and kind of what's out there. Most of these are tech companies, kind of similar to Airtable. But if you're in the hunt looking for work in that space, Airtable's got a base and they've got links to open positions and things like that. So
what's going to happen next year when the recession really seeps in? Are they going to expand the table limit?
Yeah, we'll see if they go.
What are they? 119 right now.
Only 100. So
there's no soft landing coming in 23, 24. So they need to probably get this up to 100,000. Yeah. Just say it.
All right, let's continue our first discussion. We got Kavan coming on here, and I'm gonna go to this view.
Hello.
Hello.
That's way
Welcome,
too big.
Kavan.
Dan said that Bill was going to be able to invited me to argue with you.
Oh, we're buddies.
They are buddies.
We
seen
debate
them go back and forth. There's even some private chats that some of us are privy to of Bill and Kavan going at it. And so I thought it'd be fun to bring them both on and kind of continue that discussion in public. And but I know, Kavan, you've done a ton of work on attachments and kind of like analyzing the changes. Could you give us kind of a high level overview of what your perspective of the changes are?
I mean, so I've been really curious about what's been happening and what was going to be happening with it. So first off is all of my production workspaces, I opted out. I said, this is too new. I don't want a working workspace, a working base to be affected by any of these changes. But I kept one workspace where I did not opt out just for test purposes, so I could see what's going on. And I set up an automation, a scripting automation to say basically, okay, I've got these two little placeholder attachments, and go grab that URL, see what it is. Here's the timestamp. And just to see how often do I get new URLs and when do those URLs expire. And at first I was like, well, let's do this every 15 minutes. And then I'm like, okay, this is not really doing a whole lot. When I first started up, we were still getting the original dl.airtable.com attachments. But then halfway through that day of the 8th, I started getting the new attachment field format, which has got the Airtable user content URL and does not have the file name at the end. But those weren't expiring. And one thing that I was finding was that none of the URLs for attachments that I got from the automation script have actually expired yet, as far as I can tell. So then I also started experimenting with some other ways of getting URLs. So I did a CSV export, and I don't have the exact time when those expired, but they did expire fairly shortly, probably within that day. The exact time, I'm not sure, because when I've been testing it manually, clicking on them. And then there's all kinds of weird things that you have to do regarding cache, because if you have it in the cache on your local computer, it'll just show it up to you. Or if you have issues of which server all the way is it going back, it still might be cached on some server. Or
a router.
Or a router, or somewhere around those. Did that. Also tried getting some URLs through scripting extension as a different way of getting it. And what's interesting about that is that I just looked at it just now, and those actually have expired, the ones I got through scripting extension, which is kind of strange. So scripting extension and scripting automations apparently work differently. The other thing that I tried was I was working on a custom app, and if you work on the custom apps or custom extensions, they have new methods where you can go, and it says, according to the documentation, you can get a URL for an attachment field that's only supposed to work in the context of that current logged in user. And I think the reason for that is the idea is it would not expire after 2 hours. So if, say, you're using that URL for that image, and the person might be using that extension for more than 2 hours, you want to make sure that that image doesn't just suddenly disappear on them. But as far as I can tell, that URL is the same format as what the scripting is giving, which is the Airtable user content, no file name at the end. And also when I copy and paste that URL into a totally different place, I think it's a public URL. But I'm not completely sure because of the different ways I'm going about and getting it and all the different transformations that are.
And when you say public URL, you mean a public URL that will expire?
Well, I don't know if it will expire or not, but what it is, I copied and pasted it from one browser to a totally different other browser, cleared cache, and it still appeared. And I made sure that I was not logged into Airtable as the same user in the other browser.
I see. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the challenges here is thinking about images that are flowing through the CDN, or the CDN as we formerly know it. And then the other is, what are the challenges of testing something within the context of a user? So I call that a security context. So in any security context, Airtable knows who you are. You're a named user. And so if you use a formula field to reference a URL, there's a good chance you're going to get a URL and it will never expire. And if for some chance that it does expire, it'll refresh. Much like, 1 + 1 = 2 will refresh in any formula. So I have a sense, though, that Airtable said, no, we're not going to recompute formulas for expiring things internally for users who we know. We're simply going to give them the internal URL, period, end of story. And that was really the basis for me. I think back in April when we first heard about this, I said, this is nutty thinking, because Airtable said specifically, this formula reference to any URL attachment will expire within 2 hours. And then after that, and I kept asking, and then, and then nothing, right? Nothing. That formula field is going to be dead and broken for all eternity. Now, I know better than most people that eternity is a long time, partly because I've lived almost an eternity, it seems, some days. But at the end of the day, a formula field cannot be eternally broken inside their platform. They would take so much flack for that. And so in April, I predicted that ain't going to happen, right? They're not going to expire internal URLs in a formula field, and it's going to continue to work just as it always has. And it seems like that is exactly what's happened. I think what happened is they started thinking that through, and they realized, yeah, that's nutty thinking. And that's the end of it. Now, testing, what, Kavan, you're going through, I mean, that you're fighting a really good fight trying to figure out what the heck's going on out there. You know, I don't know whether it's, you know, a noble quest or whatever, but yeah, we want to know. Inquiring minds want to know. But at the end of the day, you're dealing with at least a couple billion attachments in CDN store or CDN servers scattered around the globe. And that CDN is going to take some time to flush. And I think the artifacts that you're seeing right now are probably related to the CDN simply not catching up. Whereas internally, we're seeing what Airtable intends the app to do. And I believe that was an overnight change on the 8th. I think on the 8th, they turned the switch, they deployed. And from then on, the internal behaviors of attachment links took effect. How it affects the outside of Airtable, I think that's still a big question mark.
Yeah.
Well, one of my big things is part of the whole issue is trying to provide security so that people can't get to attachments if they no longer should have access. If they leave a non-expiring public URL anywhere, that's a security hole. And what do you do to plug that security hole?
Well, you
so if you have right now you have, I'm seeing non-expiring, well, what have been non-expiring public URLs, which is what they used to be, for my attachments.
Mm-hmm. And these are attachments.
What do you do with that security hole?
Right, and these are attachments presumably you created after the 8th, correct?
One I created before the 8th, one I created on the 8th, and I don't know if I've created one.
Yeah,
I can't create one right now.
That's the important test.
But I created it after I saw the change.
Mm-hmm. Right, because presumably anything created perhaps on the 8th and prior to the 8th got swept up into the CDN, as they always have. And then if you wanted one of those attachments to go away, you had to actually ask support, I think. Do you guys remember that?
It used to be that you would have to ask support, and then they would go in, and then they would purge it from
because even
your history and all of that.
If you deleted the whole field, it wouldn't get rid of it in cyberspace. So if you still had the link, you could still get there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, correct. It's really a kind of a fuzzy thing. And one client of mine, or not really a client, it's somebody I'm very familiar with, went so far as to issue, a takedown order under DCMA. And they said, look, take that down, right? We don't want that there. And they gave them like 10,000 image links. I'm sure that the guys at Airtable are going, oh my gosh, we got to fix this. This is like a year ago. So anyway, I think the CDN side will be solved, but right now we're on that fuzzy edge of, well, when was the actual CDN picking that content up? Because it was before the 8th, it's probably a URL that the CDN is going to keep until the CDN is flushed. How it's being flushed, I have no clue.
Yeah, I do have all of my formula fields that extract the URL are still working, and
Right.
the links are still active as of
Right.
2 seconds ago.
I've tested 10,000 of them in an automated fashion, and they all work. There's not a single. I haven't found a single piece of evidence, either on the community or on my own data, that says, "Hey, this formula field is going to fail to produce an image or an attachment of some sort."
Yeah, I mean, but it's still huge. So I just went in and I just while we were talking, created a new attachment, got the URL from the formula field, and it works. It's public.
Public describe the test scenario. You went to a like incognito browser or something, a totally different browser. Yeah.
Here, let's do what we did with the other one, which is let's go. Let me.
Sure.
Here's the URL.
Yeah, let's all
put it in project.
Yeah. It's got the that's the internal URL.
Hey, look, it's us.
We look pretty good.
So this was not one taken older. This was something I just took during this, and it's there. So whatever logic that they have, I think they're just not done with the rollout.
Mm-hmm.
I need to issue a takedown notice on this because I'm in it. and I'm also in witness protection, so this has to come down.
Bill, why are you here? This seems odd.
One thing that I thought was strange that somebody brought up on the forums that they didn't do a good job of. They definitely announced that this change was coming, but they didn't give us specifics that there would no longer be a file extension on the URL. Like that's pretty important. I think a lot of people were, doing a regex or something to extract that. So they didn't tell us that the domain name would be changing.
Right.
I think they could have given more.
Well,
It did say that the file name would not be in the URL. It was just, you had to read the fine print. That basically said that there will be nothing meaningful at all in the URL itself, including there would be no file name.
Right, but to Dan's point, they did leave a lot of these little edge case details out. I mean, this reminds me of like trying to figure out what's in spam, not the email class, the actual food. If you read the can of spam, it'll say "and other ingredients." This falls into the other ingredients arena, and in fact, nobody on the planet knows exactly what's in spam, perhaps. And of course, this is very similar to regex. Nobody really knows. No single person knows how does regex actually work in every case. That's a mystery. Airtable is kind of the same way, because if you look at the dimensions of this problem, I'll bet you could line up every single engineer at Airtable and not a single one of them would understand the impact of these changes. It's that big.
Yeah. I've been getting a lot of really odd emails just from a couple clients here and there saying like that they can't open a PDF that was emailed to them, or somebody emailed me the other day about a form. They were trying to upload a PDF through an Airtable form, but then when they try to click on it just to like verify that they loaded the right PDF, it was giving them a warning or a broken link. I haven't been able to verify any of these, but I have been getting a lot of.
That's interesting. So that would be that quick, like within a couple of minutes you upload and then you still can't see it. Wow.
I haven't checked it myself, but I have been getting a lot of really weird PDF related emails recently, and I'm assuming they're all related.
I mean, we do have to cut Airtable a little bit of slack. I mean, they've only had 4 years to figure this out. I mean, NASA takes 6 years to figure some stuff out, right? But at the end of the day, this was a big challenge. So I give them a little bit of wiggle room on this, trying to document this. It had to have been a nightmare. You saw what we went through. I mean, just even 2 people, Kavan and me, just talking on the community. There's like 15 different unanswered questions.
Yeah.
And every time they tried to answer a question, you'd get 5 more questions that they couldn't answer. And so it just started to become like this shotgun blast. So.
Well, I think part of it is a lot of people don't understand all of the different ways of getting URLs and all the like for example, I thought, hey, it's scripting, it's probably going to work all the same. However you do it, but well, actually, no, it seems to be different if it's a scripting extension versus a scripting automation.
Yeah.
Automation, the scripting app. There's the REST API. There's automations in general because you can get to the attachment field and display as file name or display as link. And there's many ways.
Exports.
Yeah. Then there's CSV export.
Right.
Then there's actually, in addition to the main URL for the attachment, anytime that you can go through either form of scripting or REST API, there's all the thumbnails that you can have, and those are also starting to look like the new format. And then, like I said, in custom extensions, there's getting the regular URL and then getting the attachment URL. And then there's the viewer URLs that you can get by pressing like Control C or Command C when you have the cell value in there.
Yeah.
But I think, and then there's also the URLs that you can get when you go into the browser console when you're actually in Airtable and you're trying to see what URL is being used there.
Yeah, and other no-code platforms suffer from this same issue, and some of them will get boxed in just like Airtable did. And I remember in 2018 asking Airtable about it. I said, hey, these are public URLs. Yeah, but they're discrete. You can't really figure out what they are. There's no way to compute that content value, but yet it's still out there in the wild.
Yeah.
Right? So
it prevents many use cases that would require things like HIPAA compliance. And there's other things that would also prevent HIPAA compliance, but this is a major one. And I think European standards for data security is another.
Well, I think Camille, you're spot on. A lot of people ask, well, why isn't Airtable becoming HIPAA compliant? This is the reason, right?
It's very hard.
It's really hard to do, and this is one reason, and there are others in Airtable as well. It's not sufficient to say, well, my data is encrypted, so therefore I'm HIPAA compliant. That's not really the answer. And of course, this exposure of attachments is also not HIPAA compliant. In fact, I do not believe that a 2-hour signed URL that expires is HIPAA compliant either. I don't think that completely rules it out. And I think it's the same for GDPR. They open an office in England, everybody thinks, oh, they're going to be GDPR compliant. No, think again. There's so many kind of loopholes in Airtable that you cannot sustain GDPR compliance.
I'm going to throw out something. I want to hear everyone's opinion. Would you guys support there being a toggle if you add an attachment field that said allow links to be public at all? Don't worry about expiring links. It's just, if they don't have that checkbox checked, you have to be logged into Airtable to open the link, no matter how you got it. And, if you have access to the base, then you can see the link.
Yeah, basically you're saying everything expires immediately.
Yeah,
right.
Well,
everything except
it sounds like you let people have an opt out.
Yeah, there's I'm trying to separate the access issue, whether or not a link should be public, even if it expires. You can have a public link that's indefinite or that expires in 2 hours, but giving the users the option to say, should it be public at all? And then just say you must you're greeted with an Airtable login screen if you try to go to that link and you're not logged in.
I would heart that 2 times.
Okay.
So
that's the way old people say emojis.
Sure.
I think one of the issues that we're running into is that it's a complicated thing. How much more complicated do we want it to be? And Airtable has said that they don't want to be your CDN. One thing I think they do is they do need to maintain some option of public URLs so that these URLs can be used in glue factories.
Yeah.
Or used in scripting or whatever. But the problem is then you're adding this extra, layer of, I don't want this to be public, but I forgot about my other glue factory where I think it's only internal because all it do is sending this thing out to a glue factory and then back to me.
It's using my API.
Actually, you do need to be public. So how do you balance out how complicated the system is with how secure the system is? And Airtable said that they don't want to be a CDN, that they're not in the business of being a CDN. So I don't see that they have a business case to make it public like that.
I would agree. I think you're right that
I agree. as well.
Airtable is indicated, and probably rightfully so, that they shouldn't be your solution to storing files. It's not a file storage system. It's to store data, which may or may not include a file. And
They are a file storage system. They're going to
yes,
store
but
files and
but
data.
a different
They're not
type.
there to publicly disperse it.
A display,
Deliver.
storing files for convenience is different than storing files as a business, right?
Correct.
If the convenience is I can look at my record and see my files, I can click on them and I can see a PDF or I can see an image or whatever. That is a convenience. It's almost like a hygiene thing. If you don't have that in a no-code database, you're going to fail.
Yeah.
People will reject you. They need imagery, as well as video, etc. Any kind of binary file. So doing that in the context of Airtable is a must. But doing it elsewhere it's not a must, nor is there a business case for it. Now, there are apps that are going to require it, but I think Airtable is rightful to just say, if you have a business requirement that involves content external to Airtable, go build that.
Yeah.
And we'll give you limited expiring access to that. The other thing that I wanted to point out is we've been talking about 2 hours. As far as I can tell from all the documentation that I've read and what I've seen, what they say is the URL will be valid for a minimum of 2 hours. They don't say it will valid for only 2 hours. So theoretically, in these tests that I've done, where I've had these URLs that are they've been valid for days. Well, they were valid for at least 2 hours, but Airtable has not explicitly stated a maximum length that it will be, at which point it will become unavailable. They've simply said that eventually it will.
I think that's to get around the caching. We talked about this earlier. If it's cached and you look at it at hour 4, well, then you don't want, Airtable doesn't want to be called a liar because some other system cached it, even though if you did it on a brand new system, you can't access that link. That's probably there's a legal reason for liability, probably.
Yeah. I just want to say is that in some of the conversations we've had, people have been talking about it being expired at the 2 hour mark, which is, I just think that we should be a little bit more careful in how we phrase that.
Sure.
All right, Bill, last word, and then we got to move on.
Yeah, I was just going to say they're basically saying, hey, you better read our rules carefully because we're writing it like tax code now, right? It's so complicated and complex, and we have to cover our butts. So we're going to write this in a way that, may or may not suit your expectations. In my view, I go with Camille. Shut it off. Kill it. Just go all the way. No more public URLs, period. And then seek to get HIPAA compliance as well as GDPR compliance. Get your servers going in Canada, get them going in the EU. And then, a lot of people are going to be happy. And the rest of us will just have to adapt. That's my opinion.
Everyone has to do what I did. Sync your tables from Google Drive.
There you go.
Go nuts.
Yeah. Figure it out. Build what you need. But don't expect Airtable to front the bill for it.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Kavan, for coming on. We really appreciate it and your work. I think the conclusion is there's still tons of questions. So maybe in a couple weeks, a month, we'll get you both back on and rehash this.
So I'm going to keep my base going, and it's going to still generate. I think I have it generating a new URL like every 6 hours now. And, part of why it might not be expiring is the fact that I keep asking for those URLs.
That's right.
But we'll see. But until those URLs expire, I'm going to say I don't think that the rollout's complete.
Right. It's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, right? What you're discovering is a Heisenbug. And a Heisenbug is something that if you watch it enough, you'll change its behavior. And that's exactly what you're doing with the CDN. But until such time as somebody can show me that an internal URL in a formula field referencing an attachment URL, I am not paying, for free sandwiches for your family. Come on. But as soon as somebody can produce that, I'll pay the debt.
And I'm just going on what the documentation says, that formula
Oh, I know.
field URLs will be invalid.
I know. And I said that was a nutty, never going to happen. I think I'm right. So far, I'm right. But it could take a while. Airtable is good at screwing things up. So they may end up making me send you sandwiches, which I'll happily do, because the shit show that will happen after that.
What's entertainment value?
The shit show that will happen after that on the community would be well worth sending your family sandwiches. It would be great entertainment. Anyway,
Very good.
God bless Airtable. They're doing their best.
They're doing their best. I'm sure behind the scenes they're having some interesting conversations the last week or so to see everything affected. But it hasn't been the huge blow up that we maybe projected, but maybe that's still to come, because they're still.
That's a slow feed.
Well,
Yeah.
I think until we know definitively that those URLs, the DL.airtable ones, if either they will never expire and they'll always be public, in which case you've got the security hole sitting there, or they will expire and that's when things are going to blow up.
And to the former, if that happens, they completely failed.
Yeah, what was the point of any of this?
Exactly.
You've just confused everyone.
To make clickbait like this.
Yeah.
There you go.
Very good. All right. Thanks, Kavan, for coming on. Appreciate it.
Okay.
We'll have you back on in a future show.
Sure, thank you.
All right. Why don't we move on to I'll just give a quick shout out to Ontair, our primary sponsor. We are in the process of launching a new form solution. I've gone through a few times, so I'm going to skip it for this week. We'll highlight it again next week. But check us out. You can join our private beta for our new form solution at ontair.com and try out that new form product. So we've got maybe 12, 15 minutes, Bill. We'd love to learn more about you. I think you've got an interesting story. Yeah, Kavan, feel free if you want to stick around for that. I'm going to go back to this view. Bill, why don't you tell us, how did you find Airtable? How did you come into this world?
Yeah, Airtable.
Or give us the 5-minute version.
Yeah, I'll try to give you the 1 minute. It was 2018, early in 2018. We had just landed a contract at StreamIt for a transit agency, Los Angeles. And in the process of doing that, we realized they really needed some notifications, and they needed it kind of in a way where they could track it and kind of monitor things. Basically, our technology runs on like public transit vehicles. And every now and then, somebody falls down and we need to send notifications, and the notifications have to go to a variety of departments within the organization. And so I grabbed Airtable, and I knew it had an API, and I knew I could jam stuff into it, and I knew I could put clients on it, and they could see what the heck was going on. So that's how Airtable gets started. Is that less than 1 minute? Yeah, it's under 1 minute. Not bad.
Tell us, you've maybe give us a little more history. I mean, you've been in the computing world a long time. You've got an interesting past. Give us the cliff notes.
Yeah, I think there's like 9 or 10 O's in long for me, because it's out there. I mean, it's just like an entire lifetime. My earliest database activities was a database that I designed on a TRS-80 in 1978. And that TRS-80 was a tape drive, little tiny cassettes, and I think it used Benton Harbor Basic, one of the first BASIC. I think Microsoft was involved. Bill Gates might have been involved with it. And from there, I was involved in the CPA profession. So I was an auditor, and I was figuring out how to automate the auditing of municipality up in New England. By the way, Allie. It was in Maine, Bangor, Maine. I was literally working in a CPA firm and automating auditing processes. And those partners kept looking at my hours. And they said, how do you get all that done in 17 billable hours? And because normally you take 170 billable hours. And I said, well, simple. I'm using computers. And they said, well, what's that? It goes back that far. And so they immediately fired me. they said, "Oh no, this is bad for billable hours. We can't have accountants doing work like this that quick." I mean, I call it a firing, but they called it outsourcing. They outsourced me to a company that was probably the best move in my career, ABC Television. That was one of their clients. They said, "Oh, these guys over at ABC, they'll love you." And I got over there, and sure enough, they loved me. I love their engineers too. They could build any computer you could imagine. And so that one thing led to another. Before I knew it, I was kind of working in corporate down in Manhattan, and sleeping in a bunk actually across from the Muppets. And that's how I developed such an affinity for the two old guys. Right? I was a young kid at the time, but now that I'm an old guy, I have great affinity for having bunked in near the closet where they stored the Muppets. But long story short, that led me into other computing work. I went out on my own, built a couple of database apps under DBase. You guys recall DBase? I used one of the first spreadsheets, which was VisiCalc on the Apple IIc, I think it was. Had color. Wow. That was fascinating. Do you guys remember when TVs went from black and white to color? No, nobody on this list remembers that, right?
I was born
Yeah.
in 1994.
So that was a watershed moment. But from there, DBase and then Fox Pro and Access and SQL Server and one thing after another, I spent most of my career building database-like things. There was one big watershed event. In 1980, somebody came to me and said, "There's no way to move data quickly between the desktop and what was the first laptop, which was rode on the space shuttle. It's called the Grid computer. And Grid had this crazy disk format, and IBM PCs had a totally disk format. And so they asked me and my partner, is there a way that you guys could figure out how to move data quickly? We figured that out. That worked until the space shuttle didn't have Grid computers. And then when that happened, we said, well, what are we going to do this little program? It was called Firefile at the time, which, by the way, that proves that no coder should name a product. Firefile, that sounds like it's destroying the data. NASA was comfortable with that, I guess. But for the rest of us, we thought, yeah, we gotta market this somehow. And then laptops were born. And then Firefile became LapLink. LapLink ended up being, I don't know, a 25-year project of some sort. So all of that was going on while I was learning new database systems. And largely, most of them were no-code database systems. We think no-code is like, oh, it's the greatest new thing since sliced bread. No, there was no-code databases long ago. This is just the latest incarnation of it. And not a bad one, I might add. Airtable's pretty good. Does that help?
Yeah.
That's my whole history in like 6 minutes.
Yeah. And we've benefited, I think, if you've spent any time in the communities, we've benefited from your insights and knowledge, and tend to give long courses on history of things. So hopefully people take the time and appreciate the effort you've put into the community. You've definitely helped.
I never set out to be an expert. That was all accidental. I mean, look at my upbringing. I went to high school in New Hampshire. In fact, Allie, is it your husband?
Yep.
He went to Winnicott as well?
He did. Same.
Yeah. So I didn't learn much there. I didn't learn anything there. So even after that, I became everything was okay. So if you look at a kid that's struggling, they'll be fine. They'll figure it out.
Why don't we, for the remaining couple minutes, why don't you give us kind of your predictions? I know you love predictions. What do you predict for Airtable, for kind of this no-code environment? What foresights do you have to share with us today?
Yeah, I mean, I think Airtable eventually will realize that it needs to be more data science-y, which is not to say that it needs to do charts better. It's to say that it needs to be able to process data quicker and bigger chunks. And so I predict eventually there will be an extension language, perhaps Python. So I think there'll be a second extension language. When? Who knows? But I think there will be enough pressure on Airtable to process and perform data calculations that don't erode their server power. Server power is a premium at Airtable, as you all know. If you just write some API stuff, you can see it in the user interface. All users are impacted by that. I think this was an understanding that we came to about a year and a half ago when Airtable basically said that. And so now we know that all APIs are lockstep with the container that your instance runs in, which means if you run massive API activities on your data, you're likely to impact all other users on that instance. And that's not good. I get it. I mean, that's an architectural choice. It's a fine architectural choice for Airtable to do. But at the end of the day, somebody's going to come along and say, I got to do a lot of crunching on this data, and I need a better way to do it. And I think Python's probably the way to do it. So that's one big prediction. Another is that the no code contingent within Airtable, or let's put it this way, the code activities in Airtable, they're going to triple. I don't see this stopping. So the irony is that this beautiful no code platform is going to have massive expansion in coding activity within it in order to satisfy customer clients. I don't think they can get around it. I think there will become more code generators, though, for Airtable. I think that's on the horizon as the coding environment becomes more complex. So is a code generator part of the no-code solution or part of the code solution? I'm not sure, right? It depends on, is it a glass half full or half empty?
Yeah, interesting. Cool. Any questions for Bill? We've got maybe a couple minutes. I'd love to wrap up. What else do you have to share with us, Bill?
I don't have anything to share because my mouse just died.
That was fun.
No, I love the conversations on the community. I think, if somebody were to say to me, what's the one thing I should learn in scripting in Airtable, I'd probably lean on know how to hash index, know how to create hash indices. The second thing that really concerns me about Airtable is there's no full text search within it. There's still, to this day, in 2018, I wanted to build a search environment, and that search environment was, based on a full text search capability. Those are hard to build in database environments because there's so many fields and so many values. So now you have context amongst each row, each value within the row. But to this day, Airtable still has not figured that out, and I predict they won't figure it out. If they haven't done something about it by now, they do not have the architecture to support a full text search. And I believe that it needs to happen across workspaces and across bases. There are some enterprise requirements that would say, yeah, we got to do multiple workspaces and all tables within all bases within that workspace. That's really a big challenge, but I think eventually Airtable is going to have to figure that out. Probably will be a third-party company that figures it out. Awesome. Who here is satisfied with search? Raise your hand. I do not see any hand. Oh, it's a wave, kind of a waffling hand.
Well, I can search for what I want to search for. I'm sure there's other people that can't search for what they need to, but my search requirements are actually fairly small.
They're handling it in a half step, I'll say. In interfaces, you have greater control over what is used as the name field when you're displaying linked records and things like that. And so when you're searching, it searches that field. So now it doesn't have to be the first field in your table. And the record list thing on the sidebar, you can show up to 3 fields. You can search any of those 3 fields that you're showing.
Yeah.
Kinda, but it's
it's
not. If you have a 4th field you want to search through, you got to use a formula and concatenate.
Yeah, and so I think if we ask the community at large, what's the level of satisfaction, I think it would be pretty poor.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is the quality of the search you need, the better structured your database is, the less of a need you have for a search for a across all the.
Well,
You know,
And
like
part of-
people are like, okay, I know this data is in this record somewhere, but they've got, you know, stuff buried inside this text field that they're trying to search
what
for.
if you're searching for pools of records?
Well, and Bill, you mentioned earlier searching across a workspace. Part of the reason people have to split data apart into multiple bases in a workspace is the record limit. And so
Right.
you have to start archiving your old records, but if you want to find that old record, now you got to search the other base and not the one that you're currently looking at. And so some of these, it's all nested together, all these interrelated issues. If you could store everything in one base, if you had the capacity to do so, you might be able to search with the current capability for what you're looking for. But, you know, that's not what we have today.
Yeah, when most people think of search, they don't think of finding a specific record. They think of a broader, higher level search. And so, come on, what I'm saying is that a lot of enterprises are having a tough time putting their fingers on the data they need to do their job. You don't have to look far for articles that say enterprise workers spend roughly 2.9 hours a day groping for information. In Airtable, this is a problem. And until such time as they cure it, they're part of that problem. And so I think enterprise, and we know that Airtable cares about enterprises. So this search has to be fixed in some way. I predict it won't be Airtable that solves it.
So when you say search, it sounds like what you're talking about is querying.
Findability, let's make a bigger word.
Okay.
Right? Is the information findable? Right? And so if you take that at a very abstract high level, it involves a query. How is the query conducted? I've always believed that information should find us, not the other way around. So, Airtable should, in some regard, make it easier for information to be aligned with that which we think we need at the moment we need it. But I think the only way to do that is yet another thing where Airtable kind of hasn't really considered much, and that's real-time computing, real-time architectures. In other words, sockets layer. I don't know if you guys have seen recently the Hotwire announcement, or it's a Hotwire project that's designed to make web rendering instantaneous. And I think we have to go in that direction, which means Airtable will have to support sockets at some point. Consumers are tired of seeing HTML rendered because it takes more than 400 milliseconds to do anything in rendered HTML on a server. And we have to get everything about Airtable should be below the Doherty threshold. If you're not familiar with Doherty threshold, just look it up. It's the 400 millisecond mark that says any human that has to wait more than 400 milliseconds is going to be pissed off, right? And that increases as we get faster and faster systems. And you don't think a human can really understand the difference between 400 milliseconds and 401? You can. Your brain knows, right? You start to get conditioned for this high performance environment. And the only way to get out of that mess is to stop rendering. Just, open the developer console and look at what Airtable is pushing out to your browser. Dan's smiling because he's done a lot of that looking, and it's like, holy crap, that's a crap ton of crap. And every second, it's more crap and more crap and more crap. And the only way around that is to go to something like Hotwire, which completely changes the architecture of how web apps should be rendered. I think React is dead. I think it's dead in the water. I think it's going away. I think it's over. That it's 15 minutes of fame or up, and what's
That's
coming
the only
in
one
after
I
that
know,
is
Bill.
what's that, Camille?
I said that's the only one I know, Bill. I don't want to start over.
Yeah, but Camille, you learned React in a hot minute.
Well, yes, but I still don't want to start over.
You need to forget it in 2 hot minutes.
Yeah.
and ironically, Hotwire might be the way to forget it. But Airtable will have to address this because React is a bad bet. It's not where they should be betting on their architecture. But anyway, I don't want to take too much time.
Yeah.
Am I over my limit here, Dan?
Yeah, we're up on the hour. We always appreciate it. Thank you so much. We'll definitely need to get you all back on and continue this conversation. So thank you, Bill, for coming on, and Kavan also. Thank you. There we go. So yeah, that concludes this week's episode. Thank you again to Bill French and Kavan for coming on and joining with us. And we will see you all next week. Take care.